In this video, we're going to learn how to use CSS syntax, otherwise known as cascading style sheets. And in the previous week, we learned how to create content using HTML. This week, we're going to learn how to use CSS, the language that helps us add style, add structure, add really cool looks to our website without just having that plain content. One way to think of cascading style sheets is as a way to centralize and add consistency to the style information you want to add to your web page. So if you could think of a human body, HTML kind of functions as the skeleton, and when we add style to the body, we get things like the eyes, the nose, hair, different things that we can change the look of and make that body a unique person. Same thing works here. However, if we didn't have a style sheet, this is how things would go. We'd have to go through every single paragraph in our HTML and say, make this paragraph blue, make that paragraph blue, if we wanted to change the color of that text. What a style sheet allows us to do is in another document called a style sheet, a CSS file, we can say, every time you see a paragraph, make that paragraph blue. And then when it links up with your HTML page, it's automatically going to make every paragraph blue, and you only have to do that once. So it saves us time and centralizes our design decisions. You'll see in the exercise files, in the head section of your HTML file, there's something called a link, and it's linking to a file called stylesheet.css. In your case, it's probably called style.css, but this is just an example. And what it's saying is go to this file in the folder called stylesheet.css, or in your case, style.css, and get the style information for this page, apply it to this web page when you are displaying it in a browser. Okay? That's really all you need to know. I always just copy and paste this content. It took me a long time before I actually memorized what media to put, what relation to put, what type to put. So you can always just copy and paste that. So here's how the syntax works. You first have, you're basically going to say this. When you look at this code, it's basically saying every time the web page has an H1 tag in it, I want you to make the color blue. And so this is what it's doing. It's saying this is the selector, so the selector is H1. So every time you see an H1, I'm going to open a bracket here. I'm going to say, I'm going to name the property. I want the color changed. I'm going to put a colon, and then I would like the value to be blue. So I want the color to be blue. I'll close that statement with a semicolon, and then close that entire declaration with another curly bracket. And then what we get is, this is what the heading would look like. You've taken a heading that's originally black and added a blue style to it. Another thing we can do is, again, we can set the selector, which in this case we'll just say we want to change something about the H1 look. But we can also have multiple styles to the H1 within one declaration. So we can say we want to change the color, and in this case we're using hexadecimal colors. There will be charts listed on the resources page where you can find the codes for these colors. This is how the web thinks in colors. They think in this hexadecimal code system, and that's how they know what a color is, so we always have to use that. We'll also add a background color. In this case, the text color is going to be blue, and the background color is going to be gray. We're going to change the font weight, and we're going to change the font family. Now, every time we create a new property to change, we have to make sure that the property before it was closed with a semicolon, and then we'll just return down and add another style there. So what we're going to get is this. So we've changed the text to blue, we've changed the background to gray, we've changed the font weight to bold, and the font family to Arial, sans serif. Now, if you notice, we've listed Arial and sans serif. What that's saying is, if the person's computer has the Arial font on it, use Arial for the font, for the display font. However, if the computer does not have Arial, you should go to the next option, and the next option is just a general sans serif. and a browser will recognize that, and the browser will have a default sans serif that it will display for you. So another thing that we need to be thinking about is divs, and you'll see this in the new index file. Divs are basically blocks of content that help us kind of compartmentalize paragraphs, text information, pictures, and kind of organize it around the page. So you can think of these as little containers of content, and this will make more sense as we start to style these. But every div is going to have its own name that we give it arbitrarily. So ID for this div is called banner. I could have called it chocolate chip cookies if I wanted to, but the point is I'm just picking a name banner so I can point to it in my CSS code. So there's the idea. So I'm saying my div is called banner. I'm gonna say in my CSS code # banner, which means find the ID banner and do the following things to that div only. So we're gonna add a width of 900 px, and px stands for pixels, and we're not going to put a space between 900 px or else the computer won't read it. So we'll say we want it to be 900 pixels wide, we want it to be 200 pixels high, and we want the color to be blue. Now that doesn't look like it's blue, but that's the code for blue. So we're going to get something that looks like this. If we had that code, we would just have this wide blue box on our browser window. Now another thing we can do is style specific pieces of content inside divs. So maybe instead of saying I want all paragraphs to be a certain color, I might say only within the banner div do I want the paragraphs to do this certain thing. So what we see here is I've given the div the ID of banner, and there's a paragraph inside it. So what I'm saying here is every time I see a paragraph tag inside the banner div, I want you to give the paragraph tag, so the paragraph text, the color of red, which that's the hexadecimal color for red. We want it to have the font family. Just want it to be a sans serif, and we want it to be bold. Okay. So inside the banner that we already styled in the last slide, we're adding this information also. So we're saying inside this giant blue banner, we're going to add a paragraph tag that's red, sans serif, and bold. Another thing that's very important to know when we're doing CSS styling is margins and padding. Margins are basically the way that we make space on the outside of an object, so the outside of a div. So this is space where we're pushing other elements away from our div, and I'll show you how this works. In CSS, you have to talk about margins in terms of the top, the right, the left, or the bottom side, and you have to give these differences or these space placements in order. So you'll see how this works here. So I'll say that I want a margin of 20 on the top, I want a margin of 10 on the right side, I want a margin of 20 on the bottom, and a margin of 10 on the left. And so if we had a blue box that we wanted to add margins to, this is the way that would look. You'd be saying that you want a margin of 20 pixels on the top, you want a margin of 10 pixels on the right, you want a margin of 20 pixels on the bottom, and a margin of 10 pixels on the left. Okay? So we're making space outside of an object with the idea of a margin. Padding does the exact opposite thing. We still use that same format where we give all the four values, the top, right, the bottom, and the left-hand padding. But in this case, we're making space on the inside of an object. So we say top, right, bottom, and left measurements. So the way this would work is if we had an object here, this giant rectangle, we wanted to make sure there was space on the inside of it, we'd say push some space from the top 20 pixels push everything from the right inward 10 pixels, push everything from the bottom inward 20 pixels, and everything inward from the left 10 pixels. And so what you'd have is you'd have a much smaller space to work with in terms of adding content because we've pushed everything in with this padding. Just think of it as you're adding some cushion room on the inside of your objects. In the next video then, we'll be talking about how to apply the CSS to your actual web page.